Manuel Saki, Top Radio.
Teresa Tufo, Ministry of Works, Housing and Water Resources.
Anthony Mompi, Iowa West Municipal Assembly.
Heinz Klug, University of Ghana School of Law and University of Wisconsin.
Geshen Apanyo Kachi, Ghana Water Limited.
Rebecca Itera, Ministry of Local Government, Chieftains and Religious Affairs.
Mohammed Mubin Minenombo, Ghana East Municipal Assembly.
Billy Dake, ECG.
Kudjo Asante, CDD-Ghana.
Obiya Irebi, Ghana Institution of Surveyors.
Achu Amegashi, University of Guelph, Canada.
For the Institute of Statistical and Socio-Economic Research, ISA, and part of the research team.
Good morning, Professor Claire Mercer, Department of Geography at the London School of Economics.
Good morning, Isaac Arthur, Department of Geography and Resource Development, University of Ghana, and also Center for Urban Management Studies at the University of Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you all and welcome everybody. So next we have our opening remarks from which? Okay. Okay.
Gathered here today. I bring warm greetings from our Executive Director, Professor Kwesi Prempeh, the board and the management of CDD, to this policy dissemination event. This research has been long in coming. Professor Mesa would testify to that. I think when we started, I didn't realize it was going to take this long, but I think the wait is worth it. There are a couple of things that have coincided that I think has made this research even more relevant now. We at CDD have been having this ongoing discourse, and I think this is a global discourse around the decline in democracy, particularly the frustration that people feel that democratic political arrangements are not delivering development. I think in many ways there are contestations around that. But it has focused the discussion more and more on different models for delivering development. And when you begin to think about development challenges like housing, particularly in the urban space, it raises a lot of questions about, how do you do this effectively, do this sufficiently, when you have so many people, particularly young people, who are looking for the most basic necessity like shelter, right? And as more people live in urban areas, that demand is even more pressing. And we've had governments and regimes over the years trying to do many different things around affordable housing to try and address this. But as that is going on, citizens and populations are finding their own ways to respond to that challenge. And I think it's that focus that really excites us, because it brings us insights that we may not have paid attention to as to what is sort of dictating the way in which our urban spaces are evolving in developing countries. And at the same time this discourse is going on, we at the center have also been looking at the different instruments that we have been deploying in the public space to measure performance. So I'm sure most of you recall the district league table, which we used to lead. I think now it's been run by the NDPC, but I was tracking development performance across a number of indicators in all the districts. We learned from that, and we tried to develop similar tools to begin to look at other areas, particularly urban governance, because some of the things we thought was not being tracked by the district league table, which was across districts comparatively. We thought we needed different instruments to look at the urban space, like transportation, like housing, and so on and so forth. And that's why we launched the Ghana Cities Monitor, which is in its second year, which Mavis and her team also are looking at. But it's to begin to understand more and more how we're able to meet the needs of urban dwellers, which are the majority of the population, according to this statistical service currently. So these tools are coming in at the same time that we are looking at things like housing. We've also developed a tool for monitoring developments in mining districts, the mining district development scorecard, and we are looking at other kinds of instruments. So these kinds of developments for us, and when I talk about alignment, brings this research into focus. And I want to congratulate the lead researchers who are here from University of Ghana and Professor Mercer, and my own team at CDD for all the good work that they have been doing in Techiman and in Accra and collecting the data. And already some dissemination has happened with those constituencies. Here we have policymakers who are thinking about these large questions, and I'm really happy to see people from local government, from Ministry of Housing, from utility services and so on gathered here, surveyors and other stakeholders. So thank you again for coming, and I look forward to the dissemination, and hopefully please feel free to ask questions, engage, so that we can take the insights to push the development that we all want. Again, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Santi. Now we start the presentations. We first have an overview of the research by Professor Mensah. Thank you.
Thanks, Mavis. Can I have my slides, please? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very, very much for being with us this morning. We are going to share with you our findings from research that we've been doing in Ghana over the last 3.5 years. Kojo was saying about the delay. We started this in COVID. That's part of a long time ago. So we're talking about this research about self-built housing. And so we're calling this homegrown growth. And we're particularly interested in trying to think about how self-built housing is actually a driver of the urban economy. So we've already introduced ourselves. I'm Claire Mercer. I'm a geographer from the London School of Economics, and I'm here with my colleagues who are the main researchers in Ghana, Dr. Isaac Arthur at the University of Ghana, and Professor George Owusu at the Institute for, George, I always forget. Yeah, it is a mouthful, yeah. I know, but what does it stand for?
Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, I always get the two S's mixed up. And also our colleague, architect Tony Asare and Mavis Zupok Dome at the Center for Democratic Development, Ghana. There are other researchers on the team, but they're not with us here today. So in this research, as I've said, the question is about starting from what the majority of people are doing in terms of building their own housing. As we'll learn from the presentation of results from my colleagues, around 90% of people in Ghana are building their own housing. It's not being provided by government, it's not being provided by public-private partnerships, it's not being provided by private developers. And we're starting from that observation of the importance of self-built housing. And we want to ask, what is the contribution of self-built housing to the urban economy? How is self-built housing actually driving urban and economic growth? And even starting from this question turns assumptions that is in the policy literature, in the academic literature about how housing should be delivered in the world, not just in Africa, not just in developing countries. There is the assumption that it should be through the market, through private developers, through public-private partnerships. And a lot of policy and academic discussion is around that end of the market. And we want to look at the majority of what people are actually doing to solve their housing needs. So this project was not just done in Ghana, it was also done in Tanzania, so the research team has been working across these two places. And in Ghana, we looked at Accra. As you'll hear, we've done research in Christian Village and Gulf Hills, just by the Achimota School. But we also wanted to include a small but very fast urbanizing place in Ghana as well. We didn't just want to focus on the major city. And so we have looked at Techiman as well as our second case study. So we're working with this idea of what we're calling the housing economy. We are assuming and examining how urbanization in large and fast-growing cities is being driven by the self-build process. People acquiring plots of land, building houses, building rental units, slowly and gradually over time. This self-organized housing, it generates demand for materials, for products, for services, for skills, and labor that is all part of the building and the finishing process that goes into building a house. This is what we're calling the housing economy, and this is what we wanted to investigate. And the things that's important about the housing economy is that it mostly operates in the absence of formal financial institutions. People are not taking out loans or mortgages, but they are self-building through their own savings, through self-financing, and this is what we want to try and understand. So we asked 3 research questions. The first research question tried to understand how people have improved their housing situation over their life course. So how people have moved from being dependents, living in someone, usually their parents' home, to being a tenant, to being and becoming a homeowner themselves. How do people make that transition across their life course? The second question asked this major question about the housing economy. How does the housing economy contribute to urban and economic growth? And then the third question was interested in how the housing economy and how investments in housing is changing neighborhoods. So kind of thinking about change at the local scale and what it means when people are improving their homes, maybe at different rates and different scales and with slightly different outcomes. So the research that we've done was organised around kind of three research methods. The first, looking at housing careers, was survey-based, and in Accra we did 80 surveys and we did 41 in Teshiman. And these weren't trying to be large-scale representative surveys. These were organised in order to try and capture people's experience over the life course. So we interviewed groups of people in different age categories. So we're not trying to say, we know that this is not statistically relevant information. It was more survey-based to try and get an understanding of how people move through housing through their life. The second research question about the housing economy, we did interviews and discussions with house builders and business owners, labourers, people with a welding workshop, people making blocks and bricks, to try and understand how the self-build economy operates. And then the third question about housing improvements and neighbourhood change, we were interviewing residents and local businesses to try and understand how their neighbourhood had changed over time. This is a very brief summary of the findings, and my colleagues will talk about this in much more depth. For the housing careers and how people move through housing over their life course, we found that actually self-build, self-organised housing has enabled the majority of people who are older to move from dependency to tenancy to ownership over their lives. But some people do remain stuck and are not able to become owners. And there's a massive question, I think, about the future and today's young people and whether they will be able to replicate what their parents have been able to do. The second major finding is about the housing economy, which we think is incredibly important and deserves greater policy attention, and George and Isaac will talk about that in more detail. And then the third major finding is that housing standards have really improved. People have invested a lot in improving their homes. And that has meant that demands for the businesses in the housing economy have increased and they've diversified. This is important because it creates opportunities for local businesses, but it also contributes to inequality at the neighbourhood scale because not everybody can improve their home to the same standard. So these are our general findings, and I now invite my colleagues to talk about these in more depth, and then there will be an opportunity for questions after that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Now we have the presentation from Dr. Atta and Professor Usu. Thank you.
Thank you, Mavis. Yes, good morning once again. So as you can see, the title of our presentation, Self-Built Housing in Urban Ghana, Insights from Accra and Teshiman. And I'll be doing this with my colleague, Professor George Osu. So this is going to be the outline of our presentation, where I'll take you through the introduction, review of housing conditions in Ghana, the methodology and study area, then the rest, which is on the key findings, some challenges of self-built housing in Ghana, and then the conclusion and policy recommendations. Now, in Ghana, when it comes to housing delivery, there are three main sources. The first has to do with the profit-led private real estate companies who build all manner of houses for sale or sometimes for rent. Then we have the state through some initiatives like in the past where we had the State Housing Corporation being very active in building houses around the cities. Like in Accra, we had the Dansoman, Snake Flats, the Dansoman estates in general, Denta and the likes. And then we've also had government agencies like the University of Ghana, for example, providing accommodation for its staff, the security services providing accommodation for their staff and so on and so forth. And then the third unit is actually individuals. So that is what we refer to as the self-builders, the private self-builders. And in Ghana, it's important to note that annually, it is expected that 100,000 units of housing are produced. But unfortunately, we're able to produce 45,000. And out of this 45,000, 90% of them are coming from self-builders, the private individuals building these houses. And this is quite intriguing. And what interests us most is that it's not just about these houses that are being produced, but also the economies around it. This initiative sort of stimulates a lot of economic activities as well as employment. And now the question is, whom would you describe as a self-builder? That is an individual who is building without any formal or government support. There are instances where they may be getting some support, but it is limited. So that's how, in a very simplistic way, that's how we can define the self-builder. Now, irrespective of how the self-builder is defined, there are certain characteristics, there are certain things that are connected with them. The first thing is that they build incrementally. In Ghana, we have about, it takes about 10 years for on average, for the individual to build a house. And this is done very, very incremental. At some point in time, the individual acquires the land. In about a year or two, that is when he visits the land to start foundations and so on and so forth. And the process is very flexible. So that contributes to the incremental nature. But the underlying factor too is that a lot of people, do their own savings, and it takes a long time to amass so much money to start the housing process. So basically, people do this by self-financing. There are a lot of Ghanaians who are risk-averse by way of going to the banks for loans. Mortgage is basically something that a lot of people don't even know about. For those who know, they are also not interested, So a lot of people do self-financing. And in terms of the construction process, there are instances where people rely on families to help in the construction process. But of course, others too would pay people to help them in the process. And there's always that question of who owns a house in Ghana. What is actually a completed house in Ghana? Because there are a lot of people who move into their houses uncompleted. There are a lot of people who move into their houses in the absence of services such as roads, electricity, water, and the likes. So they manage through the process. And this is very characteristics of self-building in this country. And usually, these houses are found in the peri-urban areas because land in the central parts of the cities are very expensive. We tried at Christian Village where we did our studies, we asked for the price of land, golf fields, and we're being told that prices start from 100,000 up. How many Ghanaians have saved 100,000 to purchase a land in that area? So you find a lot of them going to the OEBs, the Oyarifas, and the likes in the peri-urban areas of our cities. But despite the dominance of self-building in Ghana, we realize that academics are not giving a lot of attention to it, and so is policy. In the 2015 National Housing Policy, for example, there wasn't any direct reference to self-building, even though you have a lot of Ghanaians in that venture. So this raises a lot of questions for us as to why policy is not giving some attention to self-building in this country. So given this overview, The objective of this presentation is to highlight some of our findings on self-built housing in Accra and Techiman, and specifically we'll be looking at housing careers, the changing housing types and its implications to self-build, the housing economies and our self-build challenges, as well as the policy options. Good. When it comes to housing conditions, indeed, the academic literature has actually captured that there's been a lot of studies on housing in Ghana, and a lot of them have focused on, from the demand side, they've looked at rapid population growth. As the population increases in the cities, there's the natural need for housing, and a lot of people have done that. We've had youthful population, and therefore people, as they mature, they would want to have their own places of abode, and that has been captured, well captured in the literature. New urban household formations. In the past, we used to have very large families, and most of these large families were in a single or two-unit rooms, but this is changing. Today, more Ghanaians are having less children, so it means that that is also affecting family sizes and household sizes. So all of these are leading to the demand, are contributing to the demand for housing. And of course, the housing preferences are also changing. And when you look at the supply side, the issue is about land. Land is the fundamental thing, how to access land in terms of price and availability. So that is where the whole discussion starts. And then we also have issues with poor infrastructure. Poor infrastructure also affects self-building, because sometimes people would even purchase a land, but they wait till the services get to the area, and this delays development process in our cities. So that obviously affects the supply of land. And then the long-term mortgage financing is also an issue that some people don't want to, owe a bank for a very long time. So that would naturally put them off. And then the high interest rates, it's also another issue. There is one thing that we've also identified recently in in Ghana, that from the last census, we realized that there's been a reduction in the houses in Ghana, the houses that are produced in Ghana. We used to have a deficit of 2.8 million, but that has been reduced by 33%. So that's resulted in the 1.7 million. But you may think that that's a significant achievement, but if we still have 1.7 million deficit, that is also a challenge, something that we need to look at in this country. So in view of this, self-building has become the norm, that everybody is trying in his small way to put up a house. But there's also a significant lot who are not able to do that, so they are the ones that end up in the slums. And we've seen a lot of slum proliferations in our cities. One interesting thing that we've also observed is the types of residential accommodation. In the past, compound house used to be the dominant housing typology in our country. I'm sure a lot of us here have all lived in compound house. Is there anybody here who's never lived in a compound house? Maybe Claire, you haven't. But yeah, but quite a number of us have experienced compound house, or somebody who's lived in a compound house. Yeah, but in recent times, we've seen the decline of compound houses, at least from the census, housing and census data from 2000 up to 2021. We've seen that decline of compound houses, and now the dominant one is the separate house, or what we call the detached or self-contained houses. And that seems to have increased over time. And this is a reflection of Accra, that we have a lot of people who are living in self-contained house. And we see that also in Techiman, we were thinking in the course of our research, we thought that Techiman is more of a traditional, area where the social bonding seems to be high, so they will live in compound houses, but that is also changing. So you can see the decline in compound houses, and there's a high demand for separate houses also in a place like Techiman. And given the fact that there are a lot of people moving away from compound house into detached houses, this raises concerns that, people begin to question that, okay, how is this going to affect the urban poor? Would they have the resources to live in these detached houses? Because they tend to be more expensive, right? So it's quite problematic. And for those who would want to live in such houses, it means that it's going to affect their savings, because one would have to save so much in order to afford such houses. But then, when they are spending so much on housing, then the question is, what do they spend on other things? So that becomes a bit problematic. But in spite of all these challenges, there's a stronger incentive for the urban poor, a lot of people, to own their houses. So it means that housing in general has become sort of a norm, a social norm that everybody wants to. It's part of things that everybody wants to have. Sometimes you listen to people and they are like, oh, when I get money, I'll build a house. So in the mindset of almost every Ghanaian, housing is a very important thing, right? And this is being channeled from the perspective of self-building. So it fuels intense demand for land, because if you're going to build, you obviously need a land. So this is putting pressure on land on our cities. And it also leads to unplanned development. And one of the things we've identified is that sometimes people want to have their own houses out of pressure. They live in a house where perhaps the landlord is demanding for more rent and the like, so they want to move out. And in these instances, they have to develop their land in an unplanned area. And this is also raising a lot of questions, issues of flooding and the likes. They all contribute to it. So in this research, this is the methodology that we've used. Claire highlighted a bit on that. It is a purely qualitative research where we've used semi-structured interviews. So in Accra, for example, we relied on 80 respondents, and then in Techiman, relied on 41 respondents. And this actually captured homeowners and tenants. And of course, we used a lot of desk review, and then the in-depth interviews also in relation to landlords, tenants. You may be asking why landlords and tenants in these categories, because some of these landlords and tenants operate businesses in their homes. The key thing was to look at people who were engaging in businesses in their homes. So we did that. And then, of course, we also dealt with the local planning officers within the municipality of our study area, and then the owners of businesses selling house inputs. So those who are dealing with raw materials and the likes. And then with artisans. And then we did what is called the plot tour. So we visit homes and then we engage them in discussions where people will give us details about their houses, like, oh, this is a 4-bedroom house, it has a toilet, it has a kitchen, and so on and so forth. When it was built, the process they went through, and all that. And then we did direct observations and took a lot of photos to understand the process. So this is the study area. The first one has to do with Christian Village and Gulf Hills. And these two communities are located in the Okaikwe North municipality of Accra. So Christian Village is just close to Gulf Hills. They tell us that they're actually one place. But over time, Christian Gulf Hills became like a high-income area, so they gave it a new name, and then Christian Village stayed in its traditional settings. And this is a village, if you take Christian Village, it was founded in the 1920s, named after a man called Christian Abochi, one of the workers who were part of the construction of Chimota School. And it's a densely populated area, congested with low-income houses. And Gulf Hills, on the other side, is a high-income neighborhood, right, close to the golf course. So I believe that is where the name Gulf Hills came from. And it's been transformed from farmlands into a high-income area. And it features large street layouts, huge plots, large buildings with different aesthetic elements. And when you compare that place with Christian Village, you realize that whereas Christian Village have a lot of single units, they tend to have story buildings, and they still have a lot of buildings under construction over there. And development in the area started from the 1990s. So if you compare Christian Village with Gulf Hills is a relatively new area. So the pictures says it all for you. This is Christian Village, and this is Gulf Hills, the type of housing that you find in these two communities. And I'm sure some of you will be wondering, why Christian Village and then Gulf Hills? Obviously, in Accra, you have high-income areas as well as low-income areas. And we thought that, given the fact that these areas were close, it was very good for our analytical purpose or for a comparative analysis. Good. And then the second area that we looked at is Techiman, which is a secondary city. You know, Christian Village and Gulf Hills are in Accra, which is a primary city. So it's important also for analytical purpose to look at the secondary city. So we went to Techiman in the Bono East, and Techiman is a nodal center. You know, it's an area that connects Ghana to the Sahelian area, and then also to several parts of the north. And it's a key market area, so that tells you that in terms of economic activities, it is very vibrant. And now, as a result of the reorganizations or the creation of regions, it's become one of the new regions. And we have the municipal administrative capital, you know, located in the Techiman municipality, and it's also a very traditional capital. And we looked at two areas, communities within Techiman. We have Takofiano and then Henswa. Takofiano emerged in the 1970s. They were in a different community altogether, but as a result of a severe flooding that destroyed their city, so they were brought, their community, they were brought to the inner part of the city. And it's a well-planned area. They have great layouts, but the unfortunate thing is that it's predominantly inhabited by poor people. And you have a lot of people who have migrated from other parts of the country, especially in the north, residing there. And if you go to Henswa, that's an entirely different story altogether. Henswa used to be part of the Workers' Brigade area. Many years ago, the government had this state farms. So Henswa happens to be one of those areas. But as a result of the collapse of the farming, state farming activities, the chief has decided to sell the lands for housing purposes. So it's sparsely populated, but with very large mansions because of the high-income people who've decided to settle there. The roads and drainage systems, unfortunately, are poor, even though you have very large houses there. And the prices of land are pretty expensive as compared to Takofiano. But Takofiano seems to be like a built-up area. And that's clearly a reflection or can resonates with Christian Village in Accra. So this is the map of the area. So you can see Takofiano and Hensua in the map. And this is also a picture to give you a sense of how the area is. It's fast developing, and this is some of the lands, the buildings that you can find. And then these are some of the road networks within this area. And this is Takofiano, which has some of the old compound houses. As I indicated earlier on, it's well planned with the grid system. They have a drainage, but the road in the city, in the community is not tarmacked, and that also raises some questions. And in the back ends of the area, you also have certain places that need some development. Good. So at this point, I'll invite Professor George Osu to take us through the key findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isaac. And let me also thank my colleague, Claire, for setting us up to this point. So what I'm going to do is to share with you some of our key findings. And I'm going to share with you 4 main findings. The first is when we talk about the housing career in terms of gender and age. To our surprise, we found out that even though Claire, my colleague who's leading this project, talked about the fact that the semi-structured interview that we did wasn't representative enough in terms of the sample size and so on and so on. But when we looked through the data, it was quite surprising in both Accra and also in Techiman that, you know, the role of women in home ownership. That was one of the surprising things that we find out. How do you explain this? We think that what is happening across our cities is the fact that land is now commodified. And so women who have access to cash or are well-to-do are able to go beyond the cultural barriers in terms of access to land. And therefore, you have women playing a key role as homeowners and also as tenants. In fact, in Techiman, the figures were even higher because we understand that Techiman is a very vibrant market center, known not only in Ghana, but for the West African region. So that is it. And then we realized that we also look at the age categories. And we realized that for many above the 60 plus, many of them were also what you call homeowners. And not too surprising, the young ones were those who found themselves to be the tenants. We realized that, as I've said, for women, I think their role in terms of support, providing household income, which is something that I'll come back to. Home-based economic activities allow them to be able to contribute as tenants and also as homeowners. And so that is one key finding. The other key finding that we found out was the fact that in terms of access to land, we realized that land, having access to that is a key step in terms of pursuing the path or engaging in self-build. And we found out that for many people, the mode by which they access land is through purchase. I don't know whether there's a chief here. The chiefs don't want us to use the word purchase. But the reality from our respondent was that they buy the land on leasehold basis, and then that's how they start the process of building. In the past, if you go through our history, the past land was seen as selling land was seen as taboo, but it's no longer the case. Or submitting something token to be able to have access to the land. But that is, as I said, that is not the case. People do acquire land through purchase or exchange of money. Inheritance, that as we said, we find very little of that, or land be given out as a gift. So basically, the point is that in our urban settings, inheritance and gift, if you are waiting for somebody to dash you land to build, you're not going to get it. You need to find the money to buy. In terms of financing, which is also wasn't too surprising, but we've realized that the use of mortgage was basically out of question. Many of these houses were built with personal finances, and then, like Isaac said, they build incrementally, depending on their savings and so on. So the land is acquired, the person go through the process of getting materials, and gradually over a period, and that basically also accounts for the reason why it takes so long a time to build. Then we realized that for many places, self-built housing is basically the basis for community change. It is individuals moving into these places, starting to build, providing the basic infrastructure, and it was only after some time that you have the state or local government coming in to provide the support or the basic infrastructure. The third, the other finding that we found very interesting is the fact that in Ghana and in our two study sites, that's Accra and Kumasi, that housing construction is an intergenerational activity. That is quite surprising because if you look at the literature on self-build in general, this is not highlighted much. But we find out that in many of the interviews that we did in the process of construction of the house, you realize a father and mother acquiring a piece of land, putting up a structure, then over time, children growing up and coming to start the process. And interestingly, we realize that housing construction investment in education and training of children were seen as two processes which influence each other. So you realize we find a quote here where a father will purchase a land from a chief, developed it, at the same time trying to support the children to acquire education and so on and so forth. And then it is expected that when the children have acquired education, trained themselves in whatever trade, they should come and complete the house. And it's something that we find across all our studies that housing construction is not a one-off thing, but an intergenerational activity. The last findings, which basically reinforce the earlier comments made by Claire, is that the self-built housing generates a lot of economic activities and employment, and it's something that we need to pay closer attention to. Businesses, job opportunities, there's a lot that we find. And we got this through our in-depth interviews with the artisans, home-based economic activity, because in many cases, even when the houses have been completed and people are living as tenants and lords or landlords, they use the house as a place of work, and that generates a lot of home-based economic activities. So in all the communities that we find something that, a house, a kiosk somewhere in front of the house, usually along the main road, or a road running in front of the house, you find these kinds of activities. Somebody selling something and making a livelihood out of it. These are some of the pictures from Accra here, Christian village. You find a lot of these things there. Even in the high-income areas, we find this one on your top right from golf fields, where in front of the house the person is running a drinking bar, which we ask as the main source of income or livelihood for the family. A lot of what do you call it, for the input side or the supply side, building materials, wood, paints, what have you. We found this, what do you call a block making factory, and you find them all over, and they are all related to. They are not producing these blocks for a company, a real estate. They are producing for the self-build, for the self-builders or the self-build market. As you see here, metal fabrication. We have a picture on your top right showing an uncompleted house, carpenters on the side, how the sand got there through trucks or transport, the truck operators, the sand winners, what have you. All these activities create a lot of economic activities. And then even when the area is built up, the demand for the school, the presence of the school is because people have come to self-build and the whole community has developed. Homes being used for, as I said earlier, other businesses. Yeah, and it continues. Companies being set up to provide roofing sheets and one of it. This is coming from Techima, not Accra. And in Accra, you find several of these companies. So we sat through and try and analyze the economy around self-build, and we came up with these four interrelated economies. We call the land economy, the input economy, and the construction economy, and the output economy. And we say that the argument we are making that if you take each of these economies, there are several activities that goes on. There are several jobs that are created. The selling of the land by either the traditional leaders or chiefs or whatever, landowning families, it generates some activities that creates jobs, that create economic activities, and so on and so forth. If you take the input economy, inputs, material supply, if you take the trucks supplying the sand, and so on and so forth, the infrastructure that goes with it, the financing, be it informal or formal, and the labor and what have you. And then you take the construction sector, the artisans, our surveyors, architects, development agents, and what have you. It's a whole lot of economic activities surrounding self-build, not for big companies, but the self-build. And then even when you get to the stage when the house has been produced, other economic activities, as I've said, I showed you with the school, other economic activities do take place, and jobs are created that we need as a country to pay attention to. And it is the growth, it provides the basis for economic growth in our urban settings. It contributes to the neighborhood change and consequently the overall development that we aspire or look up to. So there's a whole lot of things happening with self-build that we need to pay attention to. So, but we also came up with some challenges. The question, yes, other types of, actors in the built environment, in the housing space have challenges. But we argue that if you're a self-builder, you are in a particular situation due to our weak institutions, so that if you're a self-builder, you may basically have to deal with many more challenges that a real estate agent or a firm coming in with some tax holidays here and there, what have you. The key, one of the issues that we kept hearing is access to land. Access to land. Particularly challenges with the price of land. It may surprise you that in a place like Techima, you need, in certain neighborhood, we need more than 100,000 Ghana cedis at a time. I'm sure today, if you go and interview, probably the price have gone up. In Gulfville, we were told that if you don't have $250,000, $300,000, $200,000, you cannot get a plot of land there. Yeah, so you can see that. So the price of land is becoming scarce and it's becoming more expensive. The other issue is about also the delays in the completion of the house. Lack of, I think Dr. Atta gave us a lot of reasons. the delays in completing the house. And then we also realized that in many of the communities that we studied, buildings or construction weren't adhering to any formal planning codes and so on and so forth. And that many were building even without permits. Yeah, without permits at all. In many places, we'll find that the basic infrastructure were not there, even for communities like Takofiano and others, or even Christian Village, which have been there for all these years. The basic, drains through communities were not there. We also found out that by looking broadly, particularly one of the peri-urban communities that we look at in Tachimai, that self-build is a major contributor to uncontrolled urbanization. Yeah, it's a major contributor to urban sprawl or unplanned communities. It allows cities to expand uncontrolled because people are building, and our local governments are also not be able to respond or in terms of the rapid nature of the development. And it contributes to settlements which, it balloons the city and contributes to unplanned settlements. In the course of our analysis, we spent time, as Dr. Atta said, also doing a lot of desktop review, and we were surprised that despite the dominance of self-build in Ghana, even our national housing policy, makes no direct reference to self-build. So these are some of the challenges that we came up with. And so things like this, communities without drains, communities without proper roads, houses which are being eroded because, the basic drains are not there. These were things that we find and some of the challenges that we found in these communities. So to conclude, we say that if you look at the demographic profile of our country, in terms of the rapid population growth and rapid movement to cities, self-build remains the most feasible and viable option for one to be able to house his family, and so, or the household. And so that is going to persist for the short to the medium term. We don't see it. This is going to be the part that many of us would have to be able to house ourselves. We also see that our society is also changing, and there is what you call a shift away. The census data tells us quite completely that there's a shift away from shared facilities, or houses that had multiple households. We are moving away from the compound house to the self-contained. And that means that there's less and less number of affordable housing for the poor or low-income groups. And they would have to find a way to be able to house themselves. Yes, housing conditions have improved for individuals. In fact, if you look at the census report, you see that quite clearly. The number of improvised houses have gone down, but at the same time, we also have the actual challenge with the self-build and the self-contained houses, which can't house many of us. So we argue that we need to be able to, given that this is going to be the way out for many of us, there's the need for us to be able to pay attention and to make sure that this, whatever support in terms of policy that can be provided to this type of housing, we do that. Not only to provide housing for ourselves, but also a means of generating employment and supporting the growth of our country. So we've indicated a number of things. Municipalities working hand in hand with our communities, our traditional leaders on the issue of land access In fact, in Techiman last week, when we brought up this issue, the chiefs were arguing that they don't contribute to the rising land prices. And that is we, the individuals, because a chief gave this example. Well, he's about to dispose of his land, and somebody comes and buy 20 plots. The person will only hold on, probably build on 2 plots, and the person is holding on to the other 18. Why? The speculation. And so I think we've said in other fora that in this country we don't tax undeveloped land or vacant land. I think we need to look at some of these things so that, if possible, land which have not been developed can be taxed for not only for revenue purposes, but also as a way of preventing, speculation in the land sector and trying to dampen down, this continuous rising in land prices, which is across the whole country. That will also help in curbing the uncontrolled urban expansion. We have a number of policies, the National Urban Policy Framework and Action, the Land Use Spatial Planning Act, and so on. We need to be able to really implement some of these things to improve land use and spatial planning. And then specifically, we also make the point that there is the need for the municipalities to work hand in hand with communities in a joint effort to tap into the energies of some of these communities so that, basic infrastructure can be provided. Some of these communities, if you look at the land prices, and that a plot of land is being sold, and yet, if I remember very well, at the time when we were doing the field work in Gulf Coast, when we were told that, a plot of land is about $250,000, yet the roads were not all that one would expect. I think municipalities working with communities, especially the Land Owners Association, probably some of these things can be resolved. The other, last but one, which is the issue about the need to educate and sensitize our artisans. In Techiman, we realized a particular type of what you call a building where, the house may be of this height, but the roof is about 3 times the height. And we feel that, that those kinds of designs or construction basically consume building materials for no good purpose. And there may be some form of education from architects, trained architects, and what have you will help us. We also, as a form of our last policy, is that there's the need to have some focus, policy focus on self-build. Either, local government and government providing direct intervention in the supply side, whatever can be done to make inputs, labor, finance cheaper, so that self-builders can build at affordable price. And then also, we know that if the macroeconomic, which is the indirect approach, if the macroeconomic environment is improved, we have a banking sector where the interest rates are not too high that people can afford. Inflation is managed or kept, building inputs are likely to be manageable or affordable to self-builders. So these are some of the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Now we'll take feedback, comments, and questions. We'll take 3 at a time, especially when there are questions, so that we can address that before we move on. Thank you. There are mics around, so when you just raise your hand, we'll pass a mic. Okay. Oh, turn it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, professors and doctors of the various institutions who have taken time painstakingly to come up with this research. What I don't find in the presentation, I don't know whether it's in the paper, is there isn't this correlation of this economic with the self-building. So the title says there is self-building, and as a result, it comes with economic growth. I don't really see that in the presentation. And for me, there are three types of self-build. So there is the unaided and the institutional. If you are to look at these three types of self-build, you realize that artisans, economic growth, women empowerment, and a lot of factors, come to bear. I see that you did maybe the unaided self-build. But then if you do the analysis of institutional self-build, and then you try and project the economic growth, the direct and indirect. For instance, if you look at the unaided, that is where people build, they buy materials from every part of the building and build themselves, and compare it to the aided, where maybe government provides service plots and land and other things. You realize that there's a lot of economic growth that you can tap into this paper, so that the correlation becomes very strong. I'll pause here, and then later on I can add.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. That was very detailed and interesting. I have maybe two comments. And as an economist, I'll look at it from an economic standpoint. This study is primarily studying what we say like positive analysis, the world as it is, but you also touched on some normative issues. Now, if you look at the way the world is organized, if you look at important things like education, clothing, drinks, cars, health care, you don't find an economy anywhere where individuals produce these things, healthcare, education, cars. We go to the market to buy them. People specialize, okay? So it is puzzling, and I think it's a reflection of a big market failure when something as important as housing, 90% of people produce that themselves, right? People don't teach their kids, they take them to a school. People don't cure themselves, they go to a hospital. Why is it that when it comes to housing, we have 90% of the population producing housing themselves? That shows that there's a big market failure. Okay, and as you've alluded to, is because interest rates are high. So, and sometimes too, when you have this self-building in Ghana, it can be done in a haphazard way, where people build wherever, and that leads to flooding and things that you talked about. So, and then it takes 10 years and all that. One thing that occurred to me was, I was thinking that if you're thinking about housing on economic development, when you replace self-builders with real estate companies, what will the difference be? And I thought that, well, self-builders also boost the economy. They buy the same materials that real estate companies build. But it seems to me that one area that real estate economies can help an economy that self-builders will not be able to do is that real estate companies, because they sell the houses, they make a profit, the government taxes that profit. So the government gets a significant tax revenue where self-builders that predominantly occupy the houses don't give any revenue, any tax revenue in that sense, other than perhaps property taxes to the government. But even the houses built by real estate companies, the occupiers still pay property taxes. But real estate companies, that one advantage they have is that the government is able to tax their profits, so that also helps. So those are my points, and I enjoyed listening to the talk. It's a very good piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Megashi. Dr. Megashi is Democracy and Development Fellow at CDD-Ghana. Okay.
Thank you for the studies and presentation. Yes, sitting here, so disappointed in ourselves as a nation because we are all sitting on a time bomb. If I have to pick some inference from the doctor who just gave us this exposition or his question, to start with, there is a failure of policy and everybody involved in governance. And if we are not careful, the way we are going, one day the population will rise in arms against policymakers, against politicians, and against people who are to lead. The challenges are myriad, and I'll put some questions when I finish my comment. Are we looking at formal buildings or informal buildings when we talk about the self-build? One. Is it the fact that everybody should put up a house? I have a thinking that owning a home, trying to build your own home, everybody, it's not everybody who should own a home. All because the issues that confront even the self-built are dangerous to the extent that the materials in the system are all questionable. For instance, if you talk about corrugated roofing sheet, there are various gauges, and people who are involved in the self-build don't have the technical capacity to decipher which one to pick. They go to the market and just take anything at all. As a technical person, who even do the designs for them? The challenges are, I believe people are involved, yes. If we need to encourage it, then there should be clear policy to guide what people are doing else. Because I don't believe they are putting up any resilient structure. Put a roof under your head and that's it. Whether they are technically or structurally stable is another matter. And the fact that a building is standing there like this structure does not mean it has been constructed well. So the whole issue of the self-build that is being encouraged, and from the analysis, about 90% of our people are involved, is dangerous for us as a nation. For instance, in reinforcement, when you go to the market, there are sizes, standard sizes that we use in the designs. 12 millimeter, we call it ½ inch. 16 millimeter, we call it 5/8. 3/4, we call it 20 mm. But you go to the market now. It is only in Ghana that we have ½ inch, but 3 types of ½ inch, or 4 different types. So if the designs says use ½ inch in the beam construction, they go to the market without technical supervision from anybody. They pick a ½ inch that is not ½ inch. So in effect, buildings are constructed, they don't conform to anything. There is high incidence of collapse and nobody looks to As for the local assembly, it's another matter. I don't want to go there. Land tenure system is also another matter. And it seems we are, self-build is giving us 90%. Hallelujah, we are encouraging it. But to me, as a technical person, it's very dangerous. And there's the need for us to start thinking else. Very soon, as a country, we'll have on our hands structures that are not resilient, structures that cannot stand any test of time because they just stand up and put it up. I believe living out or moving away from this place, we need to think through if this issue of self-build is going to be encouraged. Because I wouldn't want to go to the market, because the market is open, and there's so much proliferation. Who is guiding the self-build person? Who is guiding? These are some few food for thought. Probably if we have to come again, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take response from the team. Then we'll start.
All right, thank you very much. I would first respond to Madame's question regarding the linkage of self-growth with economic growth. She was looking at it from the broader perspective where you can bring in, let's say, the real estate or government, as a self-builder. Yes, we acknowledge that is also an option, but our research focused on the private individual, because we know that the government also provides house, the real estate provides house, and their contributions to economic growth can be measured. Even government alone, if you look at the investment in housing, we heard of the recent millions of dollars pumped in the settlement housing. It was not just about the money that was used in the process, but artisans were hired, local, how do you call them, contractors and the likes played a role. So in a broad sense, all can be captured in the economic growth of our country. But we limited ourselves to private individuals and to see their contribution. And we have been inspired by the 90% or their dominance in the housing construction industry to highlight the point that, yes, if these individuals are given some attention, that can also, to the development of our country, So that was how we sort of limited ourselves. So you can say that we boxed ourselves, and that is the way we wanted to go.
So I'll just have an intervention that let us see the specific, self-build you are writing on.
Yes, if you go back to the slides, we said private. Okay, but I get your point.
I think you gave us 3 categories: the unaided, aided, and then institutional. I think we were not concerned, we didn't concern ourselves with the institutional and the aided. We were looking strictly at the unaided. Yeah. But thank you very much for your question and comments. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. The other second question was on, I think you raised the question of market failure. Yeah, I mean that argument can also apply in the transport sector. In the transport sector, the trotros, what have you. And today we have Okada and what have you. Oh, Galamsey. Yeah. But the question is, that is the reality. And how do you confront the reality? So I think what this research is attempting to do is that This is the reality. How do you confront this reality? And that feeds into, say, your comments about the failure of the state. And then before I go there, you also make the point that self-builders don't pay property rate. I'm a self-builder, I pay property rate. They do pay. the tax. Yeah. The rate. Yeah. Yeah. Because the company or the institution is making profit. So it makes sense to to tax that person. The other point is the comment bars, say your comment. Very insightful. But you know, once again, the reality is that 90%, and I'm sure, well, I don't know where you live, but for many of us sitting here, if you go by Madame's classification on aided, a bit of institutional support here, we may probably, maybe 90% of you sitting here probably built, but we did it ourselves, and probably had literary support from, no, I don't know where it lives, so please, I can't say that. Yeah. 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 So that is where we come in. The question is, look, I mean, quite recently, I had a friend from a East African country who came here, and I was complaining about, you know, the way our chiefs and individuals lease our land for development. And then he was laughing that, look, in my country, we also have the same tenure system. But the difference is that institutions do work. I mean, if you look at our law on land, it's quite clear. You, me, chiefs, everybody can have access to land. But we don't determine what that land should be used for. That is a function of the state. And so if that is not happening, the question may be that we need to ask us, what is happening to the state? And the state here, I don't mean only the central government, whatever, the state in totality, particularly local government. And basically, if you look at the people that we interviewed, many of them, big houses, small houses, and just like Legon here, East Legon or whatever. Sometimes they don't even have permit. Sometimes the assemblies don't know. And the assemblies also have their own, challenges with capacity to be able to enforce the rules, the building codes. We have building inspectors. They don't work. It may interest, many people don't know. In this country, before you build, you need a permit to be able to occupy your house. How many of us are able to get that permit? And do we even have the institutions and the structures in place ready to give us the permit? We build, something that we find particularly with self-build, even before the house is completed, individuals move in and they start building. So I agree with you. We have the reality, and I think it's about looking at how we can confront the reality so that things will get better for all of us. Thank you. Maybe.
Yes. I'll come to you. Me and him is going to be some small war. So, but thank you very much. Teresa, I want to come back to you. The issues to do with, your classification is this is the Mavis. You're obstructing my eye contact with yes. This is the first time I'm hearing this kind of classification of self-built housing, and I am particularly interested in you making a point about help that is coming. So your example is like service plots, right? Like TDC. You see, immediately you go to that area, you cannot fit into the same mode as we had. Because you see, TDC land, the least you are going to get some 70 by 100 or 70 by 90 is some 200 to about $24,000. Even at the new NDCCD, it is 240,000. So it clearly, is not low income. It is not the kind of houses. No, I'm just making a point. I think the survey, from the way I understood it, went into a certain, I don't want to call it low income because it is not, but the self-built actually is piecemeal construction, where you go very systematically, and you even, for the want of a better description, you are building by faith, that you expect that you make money, and so that is how that's what we are talking about. And that is the reality. Look, we can take a very quick cursory statistics of all of us seated here and find out whether, and we can do it, let's try it. Boss, I don't know where you work, but have you taken a mortgage before? No. Yes. Yes. Next. Teresa, have you taken a mortgage? Cool. Now, in this room, if you did, and I'm sure by the time we finish, we get to the end of the table, you realize that very few people go to the mortgage. We did a quick survey with the World Bank, and even the formal sector, only 9% goes to the bank for a loan to build. And even when they go for a loan to build, whilst the banks are telling them to bring in real estate companies, Prof, they refuse it. It is not because of anything. One, we have huge problems with development control, and I'm sure Anthony Mompi will tell you the kind of struggles we have gone with the assemblies all over the country. We've done surveys at the Ghana Institute of Architects. We sample municipal assemblies all over the country. And development control is not just weak. We lack the capacity, and government doesn't support. So when we talk about it around the table, oh, it is existent. You can ask him, they are here. And let's respect them a bit. It is. No, the extent of it is another matter. Logistics, funding, training, and security, and all of that. It's a difficult issue. So I think it is something that we need to discuss. Now, the other thing is the poor regulation when it comes to the real estate business. Look, Prof, you can check for yourself and any other person who has been in this advocacy business. We have been campaigning that we want to have a Ghana Housing Authority. Teresa, you are aware, since Steve Akufu's time, we have campaigned, nothing happened. Until we have real estate properly regulated, it is only the villagios who will build, and then the people will go and buy $500,000, $1 million. When you come down, Regimano, I don't know any of us who has within this room who affords, maybe Doc, maybe you are the big boy in the house. So Manette, So you see, it is not the lower 5-10% of their population, and looking at income is what we are talking about here. So it is the regulation, if we look at policy, the regulation of real estate developers, and whether we can let them also come to the level of being able to serve those people who you would have wished that you do, who are doing self-help, would be another matter. The other thing which a question which I always fear that we do not ask is whether we should all be housed. You see, it's a very dangerous question that I think you are not the first to ask this question. There was this housing forum that was organized by CTFM, and I think one of the mortgage banks, I think HFC or one of those, their MD or something, asked a similar question, that not all of us should own houses. If we cannot house, in this country, we cannot house 34 million people, let's close shop. You see, the issue of house ownership, I am saying that is aspirational. When somebody is on a sick bed with cancer, and they haven't got a house, they would wish that they still want to build a house. It is aspirational, and that aspiration, we should rather feed into the economy as to how we can achieve our aspirations. We may differ in points, but it's something that we will discuss. The other issue that has to do with quality of construction is something which I think we had a discussion before. We need to pay attention to technical vocational educational training. Look, the masons will continue building our houses for us. The carpenters and the electricians will continue. Energy Commission has done very well by trying to standardize that you can't just go into anybody's house and wire. So there are whole issues that they are doing. We are talking to TVET to find out how we can get our masons. The moment the apprenticeship system that we had, the traditional apprenticeship system that we had in our villages broke down, the quality of houses started getting affected. So what the substitute is that if we define an enclave, if for instance we take Ladade Kotopon and you are building there and you do not have a certificate that says that you're a TVET person, we can call it a TVET enclave. And then we start taking off. After a while, the pressure will push a lot of people to go and get some part-time training in that kind of thing. But the conversation must be had. Whatever it is, we have to find a policy to improve what we have. But not everybody can sign a contract with a contractor for you to come and build and all of that. The question about the standardization of materials is something which we intend publishing on it. Reinforcement, it's not just the diameter of reinforcement, for instance. Some of them are too brittle. I'm sure a company, yes, I think one institution mentioned that even the reinforcement that we have on the market has too much carbon in it. But you have to be careful because our journalist friends can also be a bit sensational about it and go and publish things they are not supposed to. But however, we need to talk about it. That why is it that Ghana Standards Authority keeps adding on to the things they cannot do? That is what we have to talk about. As for the people coming to sell, why is it that Ghana Standards Board is not doing proper gatekeeping at the point where it is being manufactured or imported? Why can't we go and blame the people who are going to buy? Let us talk about if we put, when this issue of this, what do you call it, a drone buyer now, people who had, the red thing came and the Pharmaceutical Society, Pharmaceutical Council picked it up. In India, they were tackling their regulators. What are we doing? Why are we behaving as if it is? Let the people who are going to buy go and buy what has been approved and put on the market. That's all.
What I want to add is that now that the policy is becoming clear that cell build cannot be avoided, let us have a regulated policy so that we can tackle it end to end, from land acquisition through to material acquisition, through to design. We need to tackle it, because what we are doing, we are all sitting on a time bomb.
Thank you. Please, we'll start from here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I have two comments. One on the study itself, and one speaks to the need for analysis also based on the intersectionalities. If that is not possible now, you may want to consider a survey that will allow for that, because the differences certainly exist, not just by the ages, not only by the sex, but even by migration status, indigeneity, whether you come from where you are building or not, what are your income levels, your educational level. So I think you should try and mine the data a little more. And for now, you can get a bit more of the intersectionalities to pull out what can enhance a follow-up survey so that the work will be a bit more useful and specific when you are targeting what next should be done. That's on the service side. On the presentation, I was thinking also, because you had such a large number of persons you interviewed. Perhaps you could have given us, I saw that you did list them, but for qualitative research, we are also interested in who was interviewed where and who is that person. So some background information also helps, even with the analysis to how long they have been building would have been helpful. And we know that we have people who self-build the Isikafor style. That's how I'll put it, and then maybe my style. Even though it's not, somebody said by faith. Yes, we do the by faith. That one is very true. But you want to finish and move in as one. An option for you is to finish and move in. But in some cases, out of need, that was what was also raised. You can't afford to finish before you move in. And I remember my much younger days, where we moved from one place to another area and virtually completed it. Once the bedroom side was ready, there was no hall, there was a corridor. We started, that's how my dad did it. Finally, the sitting room was where we were throwing water small, before I realized that one too had been done. And then we continued, one room at a time, sort of. But before I realized, you now have a complete. So it's more out of need that people actually move out to do these things, and also by their level. So maybe if you can tease out these issues a little bit more from your data. Then on the policy part, I wanted to ask, I don't know, I think most of our issues are from the enforcement angle. State failure, simple. And then, of course, the other side of citizens being so indisciplined. Thank you, I think that's the word. It is so, it's not just indisciplined, so indisciplined, because the state has failed to enforce. So everybody, live and let's live. Unfortunately, I realized some time ago, somebody was telling me, in the house that they were building that the person was not going to live in, he had some different type of people building. But the one that he was going to live in, he had a different type of people building. He's not going to live in the one that he's renting out, so he really doesn't care the quality of materials that were used there. And if we should do that, we will certainly be getting buildings coming down on people. And then, of course, since we don't even value lives in Ghana, it will just pass as the usual news. After some few days, it's over, and we move on. And I think it's about time citizens also played their parts in ensuring that policies work. And then when they don't work, we should hold the authorities accountable. It's unfortunate that we have grown into a citizenry that is timid, very laid back. Apart from elections, we don't do anything else. And we seem to think we will get what we don't demand for. You don't. You will not get it. If you are served a raw deal and you take it, that is what will continue. So it's up to us. What we choose to do will determine what we get. So over to us. I'm sure those of us here, we all have something to do and a role to play to that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I wanted to find out what's your operational definition of urban economic growth is. And then also, to find out whether the MMDAs were engaged in terms of whether they generate revenue, in terms of revenue generation from the building permits and also property rates. Then maybe we can say that, yes, they generate a certain amount which helps them to maybe provide sanitation facility for women in the marketplace, so the women are able to work and generate revenue. So it has that trickling effect, and so there is some kind of economic growth there. So I wanted to find out whether part of the interviews, whether the MMDAs were engaged to find out, in terms of revenue generation, What do they get from the building permit? What do they get for property rates? And how are they utilizing such revenues, which would in turn bring about urban economic growth? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to also say something here. I think the researchers were positivist, kind of. If you look at the correlation they established between the housing and that of the economic development. But there's another thing very crucial that they didn't do. In natural fact, when they mentioned that of Accra and Techiman, I thought, yes, it's a good sample. Because if you look at Techiman in particular, even though the buildings might have brought other economic benefits like you enumerated, we can also not forget the destruction of a major economic source, farming. And this is where I had wanted to see, because every structure you put destroys a farmland. And that is what we are growing in Ghana. We are growing buildings, and we make stores under them. You understand? I don't know where we're going to get the products to those stores. So please, let's look at that side of it. Then there is also another area that maybe your research did not capture. If you look at all these buildings, we have artisans, the masons, the carpenters, and other things. I don't really know whether you also check whether they pay tax. So maybe we can talk, think about that next time. Yes. And then when my boss was talking, he said that district, he doesn't want to go there. And let me take this opportunity. I'm from the Office of the Head of Local Government Service. We've gone around the 261 MMDAs to conscientize people to even come out with a new physical planning manual. And this is the first time we've done a manual that has operational side of it, that it tells you step-by-step approach of doing things, procedural part of it. Please, you see the problems district assemblies are facing, and I think all of us, please, let's come together and help them. Come to Office of the Head of Local Government Service, let's help them. If you look at our land tenure system, you go to the north, and some lands belongs to the chief priest. You come to the south, middle belt, you have the chiefs and farms, two lands, farm holders, and then family, and the same as the southern part. A chief sells his land, and no recourse to the district assembly. What do you do? Our people are trying everything possible. So this time around, you see, when we went out, what we decided to do was to call chief landowners, and then our staff, we sat down, and some of these chiefs tell us straight away, in fact, na yenim. And this is the time they want our people even to come to them and enlighten them. So we will play with you. It is an area that all of us must look at seriously. Each one of us lives in a district. If you can do the same, your research, is it research? The one that you did? What is it? No. The one that you started asking. How many of us go to our district? You say, how many of us even go to our district? We don't even go there. We don't even know what they are doing. How many of us even ask about anything? You see, our development that we are mentioning, we develop backwards. You will see all those houses, and then they will go to ECG for electricity, water for water. How do you expect the assembly to be able to construct roads? It is practically not possible. And that is why most of the places that we are living, especially the rich people over here, where you have your multi-million buildings,
The roads are not good. And that is the situation. So we played with all of us. The district assemblies, you see, and then we talk about property rate. People say that, you see, I'm telling you the practical issues. When you go there, people will tell you that the assembly hasn't come, they haven't come, so we haven't paid. Do ECG come to you? You go to ECG and pay your bills. You understand? So we will. Easy, we must understand the district and what we do. You relax, sir. You relax, sir. You relax, sir. So please visit the assemblies, get to know what they do, and let's all help, and then we can move forward. Thank you very much.
So can we let the researchers? Yes, I know, but this is the third comment. Yes, that's the third comment. So unless, Prof, there's no reaction, the comment should continue. Because that's the third comment. Okay.
I think that Dr. Isaac Arthur made a comment about even the issue of definition of completeness. And you know, when a project is deemed to be completed, and I go to Anthony Mompi that I want a certificate of habitation, it kicks in certain statutory processes. The moment I write that I have completed the building and I'm moving into it, it means that the assembly should give me a house number. The place should be registered for waste collection. And pardon me? No, that's not, that is not a legal thing. The regulation is very clear. You give me a house number, you register for waste disposal, and then your data is put for property rate collection. So the moment people move in without notice to the assembly, it is loss of revenue. In fact, if we decide that we want to prosecute people for moving into their properties without permission, can you imagine what will happen? You see, so the advocacy should be towards, even if it is partial completion and you can apply for it, that it has to be done. So yes, occupancy permit, you know. So whilst we are discussing all these things, we must understand that the 90% of the 90% that we surveyed is also flouting the law, you know. So let the discussion go on, and let us segregate it in such a way that we can pick line, you know, let's not convolute it. Then we can pick the policy direction on each of the ones that we should, which one should we deal with advocacy? Which one can we deal with the assemblies? Which one should we deal with the parent ministry and things like that? Thank you.
We can respond. So my colleague will start and then I'll come in.
Thanks. I wanted to respond to a couple of the questions that have focused on what do we mean by urban growth and urban economy. And I appreciate that we're not talking about it in the same way that is often discussed by economists and by government, which often focuses on quantitative measures of the national economy and GDP growth. And that's not the approach that we're taking in this research. We are interested in what you might call the informal economy. We don't call it that in the research, but we're interested in thinking about the economy more broadly and the way in which the majority of people actually make their livelihoods work on a day-to-day basis. So we're actually really interested in cash and the circulation of cash in the local economy, which is really important for all of us in the room, actually. So that's our kind of approach to what we mean by economy. And when we say economic growth, we're not talking about GDP growth rates, we're talking about how people improve their lives. And so for that reason, we're interested in things like, we're talking about the housing economy and masons and block makers, because they are receiving cash in the local economy and it's being spent in the local economy. So it's improving the local circulation of cash. And that is what we're interested in, and that's what we want to highlight. We're not saying that it's wrong to focus on national GDP growth rates or to focus on real estate, but exactly as Tony says, real estate companies in the UK, as much as here, they're not providing housing for the urban majority. And so we're saying, can we think about what people are actually doing and ways to support that in ways that address some of the issues and challenges that you're raising? So, for example, the really important question about tax. Sure, self-builders may not be paying tax on their buildings, but they're paying tax on their building materials, and they are the major consumers of building materials. Could something be done there that might help self-builders? So these are the kinds of questions, and I appreciate we don't have all the answers to the important questions that you're raising, but we're trying to encourage a slightly different conversation, I think, around the contribution of self-built housing to urban economies, more broadly understood.
I think, let me, I think you asked that question whether the municipalities were involved. In fact, in all the areas that we work, the municipalities were heavily involved, including even the selection of the specific communities. For example, in Techimai, our first visit took us to the municipality and to the planning office. And actually, they took us around the communities. And based on their guidance, we even selected the two communities that we selected. So they were heavily involved. And we had conversations around, issues about planning, permitting, revenues, and whatever. All these were discussed. So that's my response. The other comment is, I think your question on the environment. I think we stressed that. In my presentation, I talk about uncontrolled urban development, the sprawl that we are seeing around. It's not only Accra. The first time I visited Techimai was some few years ago, but I was so surprised. The extent that now the cities, Techimai, let me call it a city because it's becoming big. Cashew farms are now being wiped away. And we talked that in our report that if we don't do something, sometimes we get this impression that the urban sprawl and the uncontrolled development is around Kumasi and Accra and Takoradi. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And I've always argued that if we think we have a rural setting somewhere where a big chunk of land is lying for future agriculture, I think we need to be very mindful. The expansion is taking place across all the different urban categories. Rural areas are expanding. Our secondary cities are expanding. The small towns are expanding. I mean, if you drive from here, Accra, through on the Kumasi, I mean, if you take Kumasi, the highway, all the way to northern Ghana, if what is happening continues, I don't know where we are going to get food. There's a huge issue about food security in this country. And for places like Techimai and even around Accra, when I was a student at Lego in the 90s, and I'm on vacation or coming back from home, the Accra that I know was at McCarthy Hill, where you see those rich houses up the hill. Everything in between, all the way to Winneba, was farmlands. We no longer have that. And it's not happening here, it's happening around us. And so I think we have yes, we've been talking about Galamsey, but I bet you, in my view, I think urbanization is doing more harm in terms of the rate at which agricultural lands are being encroached and destroyed than even in Galamsey. So that is that. I mean, the question on the, what do you call, I think you've responded to that. Whether can artisans pay taxes? I think that's a broader question that we need a conversation about the informal sector. I schooled in Norway, but I know in Norway they have something that they call black. Black in Norway means that informal work. You know, the artisans. They were paying tax. They were paying tax because I know that system. But at the beginning of the year, you have to go to the tax office and tell them, look, I'm an artisan. I'm expecting to earn this much. Is it possible we can also have the same? Now that we are registering this, we have Ghana card and what have you. Let's find a way of registering them. Because from this study, we've come to realize that even for artisans, there are hundreds and thousands of artisans. I have a guy, what do you call a tailor, and I've always been fighting with him. Any work he does, he wouldn't allow you to pay through the bank. And that guy pays nothing. I can tell. And he has work all over. Sometimes he's to Pram, sometimes to Kumasi, whatever. In fact, he earns more than I do, but he pays nothing. So that is something that we need to look at. As for the question of land, I think we've discussed a lot about the land question and how we need to move on. I think it comes back to particularly our municipalities. We need our municipality to do more, whether collecting property rate or you gave the example of ECG. When you don't pay your post, for those of us on prepaid, if you don't buy that, what happens? You sleep in darkness. If you are postpaid, what the ECG does is that it disconnects you. Why can't assemblies do the same thing? Yes, we don't pay. In fact, in Tanzania, what they've done, you know what they've done? In Tanzania, they have connected property rate to purchase of electricity. If you don't pay your property rate, no electricity for you. And they move on. I think we need something like that. Yeah, thank you. Come again. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We have the next batch of 3 and comments from Dr. Sante and Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. and the team. Listening to you was very refreshing. I think there are a lot of interesting points that we've raised, obviously, because housing is very central to development. Mostly in the literature, you hear that if you deal with the housing problem, you're able to deal with the urban problem. Because if people don't live in the right houses, services become a problem. Then all of this urban risk that we see when it rains, with flooding and so on and so forth. But what is key for me is the tripartite nature of housing in Ghana. The fact that we have government on one side, we have the private players on the other, and then individuals also on the other. Well, listening to everybody in the room, I think we have the cause to blame all these 3 players. Because in one way or the other, either we are not doing the right regulations, or we are not doing the right enforcement, or those who are doing the self-build are also not building the right materials, or even building at the right place. And so now it rains, and then even areas that did not receive the rain tend to also flood. So housing is very central if you want to deal with a lot of the urban issues. The other thing that, listening to the presentation, that jumped at me is the fact that, let me just take the private players maybe. If you look at a lot of the so-called suburbs, which today have become part of the city, you see a lot of gentrification happening, where houses are being turned into other uses, for instance, commercial offices and all of that. Have we really thought about how we are going to regulate that space? And it's not just only the low-income areas. It starts all the way from even the rich neighborhoods, cantonments, rich. You go, most of these residential spaces are being turned into commercial and office spaces. What are the implications for parking? What are the implications for waste management? What are the implications for services, water, electricity, and all of that? So how do we intersect these housing issues with all of these changes happening? There's also the issue of dollarization of land, where when I moved to Adenta, where I live, we used to buy lands in cities. Now, anytime I move around and I see an open space, a land, and I call, they price it in dollars. And if you don't buy the private sector, they will come in and then pay more and even put up these estates. So how do we also look at that? How do we check this dollarization of lands, and how, in terms of the spatial plans and in terms of development plans, do we have the systems in place to regulate them? Then the other issue, of course, incremental building creates a whole lot of local economic growth, which we've talked about. We don't want to belabor the point. But Prof, the other thing I also was thinking about is as cities grow and we do all these projects and all of that, that is the generative side of cities. But cities are also parasitic, of course. So where is the sun coming from? The sun is coming from the hinterlands and the neighboring areas. So sun waning is a big problem around the neighborhoods. How are we able to also account for all of these ecological footprints of cities as they build, as they develop, the impacts that, the footprints that they leave on the ecology? We need to also be able to account for it, not just in the rural areas, but also around the urban peripheries. Because if we don't account for them and we only look at the positive sides, of course, then the assemblies and the other people are just yeah, they are not being, in a way, being made to account for some of these things that happen in their spaces. Where do we dump the waste after generating all of those things? So issues of waste management also comes to play when you are looking at the ecological footprints of cities and all this development that occurs. Thank you very much. These are some reflections I have.
Thank you very much. Really fantastic research as far as I'm concerned. And I liked your qualitative approach to look at it from the bottom up. A couple of questions that I had, one policy-oriented, and the question is, at least from my experience elsewhere, like in a place like Botswana, where site and service was used so much in order to provide availability for self-build. So the building is going on by the individual who access to site and service, but it means that there's more town planning and development going into it in the first place. And obviously, I think the land, the question of who controls the land makes a big difference there in terms of how that's possible. But I was fascinated in your study that in both locations, you looked at both what was clearly more upscale or high income versus low income. And I wondered about the differences that you saw in terms of the ways in which the self-build took place and what the consequences are. I'm living in East Legon, and there what I'm seeing is enormous amount, whether it's self-built or company-built, of building properties that most Ghanaians can't afford to live in, even at rental rates. They're charging rental rates which are far above, and so you see enormous numbers of buildings, even completed buildings, with nobody living in them. Now that's an extraordinary problem, I think, for the city, for the population, etc. But I wondered then in the distinction between, because you focused on self-build, were there in the wealthier parts, were there these what somebody may have referred to as gentrification going on? That was leading to the production of buildings that weren't even going to be used. Some people have hinted to me that there's a certain amount of money laundering going on or something else going on with this kind of development. But that's very problematic development in terms of the city as a whole. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. and your team. My first question was on the paper itself, and my second question will be on whether you have some data for the areas, the stage of completion. Could you collect data on that? I would want to know. Because it's incremental, whether you have the stages at which they have reached and the data, policymakers can use and rely on. Thank you.
3 more, and then, yes.
Okay, so I have 2 quick comments. One is an anecdote. So in terms of regulation, some years ago, a friend of mine from Zimbabwe came to Ghana for a conference. He lives in Canada. So when he returned, I asked him, what do you like about my country? He says, I like your country, but there are too many uncompleted buildings in your country. You won't find that in Zimbabwe. That's what he said. He said, you won't find that in Zimbabwe. And I don't think Zimbabwe is the model for us, but that was interesting. Now, regarding, this is just kind of a half-baked idea, but there's something that struck me as I listened to what was going on. If you look at places like UK, Canada, Germany, blah, 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 when people are thinking about owning a house, they see it as both as for consumption and financial investment. Most people who own houses in Ghana, self-builders, don't see it as a financial investment. It's for consumption. So you don't sell the house you heard from your father, you never sell it, or from your mother. Most people don't sell houses. So I think it affects the way they perceive houses, it affects the value of the house, and it will affect the desire of a bank to lend to you, because the house is not going to appreciate in value. So that's why, let's say in a place in Canada, in a residential area, when you come and set up a nightclub or a church that's going to disturb us, we'll go after you, because you are depressing the value of the house. But I remember some years ago, I went to Chez Afrique, a nightclub, and it's a nightclub in a residential area, and I asked them why. He said, oh, the people say they want to come enjoy the music some. That is, the house owners want to enjoy the music, right? And there's a Kenya State Guest House. It's a guest house of the University of Science and Technology. Right, like less than 100 meters, there's a club there called Area Bar, right? There were some visitors who came to Kenya State Guest House. They said 2 a.m., they couldn't sleep. They checked out of the place. So I think if the house is not seen as a financial investment, it affects the way it's going to be financed, right? Because we know you're not going to sell it, it's not going to appreciate in value, and so the financial system is not able to support you. That is why I think Prof said that somebody's building their house, and they'd rather wait for 10 years to build it rather than take a mortgage to complete it, because they don't intend it to be a financial investment. So they'll take their time and build it, and they don't care action that depress the value of the house. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this has been a very interesting conversation. I'm just thinking, that, or I'm hoping that we can draw some more, we can build some consensus on, what kinds of advice to give to our governments, because there are some really serious questions that have been put on the table. 3 issues in particular. I think there's been a debate around cost-benefit of compared to forms, and the issue that you raise about farmlands and sort of the trade-offs of kinds of development. We need to get a handle on it, because the externalities that self-build are generating from all the things we're talking about, I'm sure if you were to do an equation, where do you come down on? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? It might look like it's a good thing, on the face of it, but when you begin to, whether it's flooding or whatever it is, then these are really significant problems. And if they keep going the way they're going, I think we already are experiencing that. So I think the first issue for me, the researchers, I think, have done a brilliant job in trying to give us a sense of, what some of the realities are. But I think from a policy point of view, it's a cost-benefit analysis of, this type of solving the housing problem. And that would inform, really for me, the second point as to how should government react. The gap is so acute. If 90% of housing delivery is by self-build, and government is hoping to do more institutional or some type of supply, then we are, the gap between policy and reality is so far apart. So what then should be the intervention? And that's you believing whether self-build works, a reality, you have to deal with it, or saying, no, we have to reduce self-build, and therefore you have a policy around it. But also, we need to deal with the reality. So you can set yourself a target that, okay, after self-build, we need to standardize processes to allow to self-build to do A, B, C, D. We need to, strengthen the technical support, people who are doing self-build. Because at the moment, I really worry. I mean, there was the recent, the Standard Authority alarm about the use of American paint, which has so much lead. And people are buying these things, they cannot tell the difference, but because it's cheap. So the kind of impact on public health, on ecology, I mean, all of those things, it keeps piling on to a point you can't really reverse it. So I think from a policy point of view, these are the interventions that we should address our mind to. Government has to be definite. What is the policy around the majority of housing that is being delivered currently? And over a certain period of time, 5 years, 10 years, what are we going to do to intervene? And the last point, so I'm hoping, because initially there was some gap between, I think, the Institute and some of the, policy researchers as to how we should proceed. But I think there's already a consensus, also based on what Professor Chu said about the economy of it. So if we could get some direction as to these questions, that we walk away from here with some, some ideas that we can take to government, because government institutions are represented here. But from where we sit, to reinforce these kinds of issues, I'll be grateful. My last point is about youth. And I think, Professor Mesa, you mentioned in your introduction about the group that is stuck, that the likelihood that they can even repeat what their parents did is very slim. So it means that you're going to have a lot of young people who cannot even do self-build, let alone, the other type of. And what does that mean? Because if your measure of success in life is housing, this and that, and you know that you cannot even rent, and therefore that's where a lot of people are putting up kiosks and other kinds of, or living in slums. How does that add to your, whether or not how you perceive life, whether it is something that you hope for, or you become very hopeless and maybe take more risk, So these are fundamental questions, and we have a lot of young people who are coming out of the university with expectation that they're going to own a home. So I didn't see much of that in the presentation, but I really would like to see, because I think from government policy perspective, this is a huge problem, if it's a problem that has been identified. So maybe some elaboration on that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm with the local government. I'm with the Ghana Municipal Assembly. I'm also a member and one of the executives of the Ghana Institute of Planning as well. I just want to take this opportunity to highlight on the issue of policy for us to understand the local governance system. Actually, the policy on building is a very good one at this moment. It's just that we are quite a bit detached from local governance because of the long disappointment with perhaps how things have been going on. If you are to acquire permit and if you look at the process, your research has indicated the way they don't adhere to the building code. The building code is so comprehensive that, if you've seen it, the prescription of even materials are all stated clearly to meet the standard. And to start with, the policy document indicates that upon submission of those documents, a document must be drawn by an architect with a stamp on it. So this already sets out to regulate the type of material and even structure that you are putting. And when it is submitted, an engineer will be designated to monitor the process from the start of the construction till it gets to some level. The documentation you even submit before you are allowed to start your construction, which has to do with the land ownership, are all stated in this document. So from the point you acquire a land to building and then completing, and even the location is all in the act, in the manual, and in the building code. Now coming to the issue of our challenge, the architects, the surveyors, and the others, first of all, because of the informal nature, are not available at this local level to provide service to even the builders sometimes. And at the assembly level, the staff of these various engineering categories are not adequate. For example, if you look at the way we are building in my municipality, Ghana East Municipal Assembly, if we spend Monday to Friday, because people will not willingly come, to go around and check these and apportion, let's even say 50 or 100 houses to each engineer, they will still not be able to attend to them. That is the gap. But the policy document, so that is where I would suggest that we shift the policy issues to enforcement, seriously on enforcement, and this will happen. Let me give an answer. Just last Monday, I was driving to the office and I passed a famous place we call Pure Water. We've managed to keep it more travel. And then it's a pond we have put the wetland restricted area. There were young men there with machines filling. So I didn't confront them, I just called the tax team. I got to office, we mobilized and came there, and we took them to police station. The next day, I was driving to the office again. They were there again. So those at the police station were still there. They were there again, still working. Before we closed from work, they were actually at the office threatening us. Our engineer, if not because the tax team acquired Brownie Boy, they wanted to even attack the engineer himself. It didn't end there. 3 days later, they had actually brought a 40-footer container to put there. So the issue is about security and then enforcement. The policy document may need improvement, but it's okay. Then the other part is the spatial plans are quite a challenge. The plans are not really regularly updated. That is where the challenge is. But in terms of what guides our building, let's look at the Act 925, let's look at the manual, let's look at the code, and see where improvement could come. But for now, it can do and help us with the issue. Lastly, which I mentioned, the indiscipline and the insecurity, which links to the property rate and all of that. Recently, we did a study on urban governance with Hull University. Even the concern of the residents are these same issues of property rate and then builder. But the records and the insecurity is what is affecting us. Last year, Langas came into our office, chasing us in our pickups, and they broke our glass and entered the premises of the Ghana East Municipal Assembly. The insecurity is so, sometimes they pull out guns. So we are establishing a kind of connection with the so-called Langas group so that we could just call their bosses to let them know. So yes, actually I initiated that we have to talk to them. They are organized group, they are a threat. We are not security enforcement agency, but when we identify their heads, we can let you, we are not interested in who owns the land or who is in building, but we are interested in the procedure to doing that. So tell the people that when we come around, we are not come to take anybody's land from the person. Just let the person know they need to submit some particular document so we could guide them to do the building. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. My name is Salif. I'm speaking from People's Dialogue. And thank you, Prof, so much. And then my first area has been a bit, in a way, explained by Professor Mensah. I wanted to relate the key headlines of the research to the economic growth. Not too specific on how policy will influence, but economic growth in which direction. For example, in the study, Prof mentioned slightly slum issues and then informal settlements. In the contribution so far, I haven't heard some of the factors or what are the push or pull as against the self-built housing. Now, if we relate our development trajectory to our situation now, in the past, compound houses had a reason. Each family had a culture of economic activity. Either they are farmers, so the father, together with his siblings, will want to come together within one environment and then build such that the children they produce are supporting their economic activities, such as farming. Now, others were also blacksmiths. Some butchers. What were the mothers doing? They do economic activities in the informal market areas where they do the buying and selling, retailing. But gradually, that system has been, that is dying, and it's killing the extended family system that we used to practice, which prevented self-owned housing development, because you grow and there is accommodation within the house. Now, what are the push? Because almost all economic activities, the adventurous areas, educational facilities are located in the urban cities. And so every farmer also wants to push the child to the big city for a better education. Now, the kind of education we produce do not teach us to go back and support the farming practices that our parents were doing. And so when I complete, I look for a greener job here, well paid. And when I'm living here, I'm a tenant. Now, my income is what decides what kind of accommodation I occupy in the city. If I cannot pay for a 2-bedroom, I will be looking for a chamber and hall, a single room, self-contained. Now, it has forced people to buy land even quite far away from their work environments so that they won't continue paying for rent. Now, those who have compound houses here are also compelled to convert almost every corner. If you go to Accra side, even the Kiseman area, places that were to be used as sanitary blocks have become rooms because we are all in Accra. We want to work and live in Accra. So my economic growth is tied to the environment where I do my work. A lot of the artisans are also here. the tax net is not able to capture them because the kind of accommodations they seek does not also make them too close to the system that we can practice. We just had a property tax workshop. Prof, you were there last week. And the mapping, identifying the areas alone is a challenge to collection of property, both in the individuals and in the built environment. Now, if we categorize the research areas, the land economy, whose growth? Is it the chiefs? Who sells the land? Is it the chief who sells the land and is growing financially? We haven't questioned that. How does the chiefs relate their ownership of land to the municipal assemblies so that the assembly in planning will relate to the area being earmarked for development so they can allocate and put in infrastructure systems in there. So the input economy itself, that is where we are looking at those who come in when you are to build, and then they come in. Many people cannot go for the formal construction companies for building. So they are using the local boys around. And so when we listen to the poor infrastructure layout, it's as a result of the kind of engineers we use at the ground. And what is the factor? Because he can't afford the cost of a qualified engineer. And where they even buy the land, it is a bit far. So we build incrementally, yes, slowly. And when you get one room, you think it's okay, and then you go and occupy. Now, those who are not able to build with brick and concrete, they put the wooden structures and the roofing sheets. And then before you realize, the slums are generating around the place because people cannot afford the cost of materials, yet they can also pay rent. And they want to economically be what? Functional. So they have to grow. That's the only way they can also take care of themselves and then care for their children. I think I will not add the others. Thank you.
So we'll have comments from the lead researchers, then we can close.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing set of comments. Thank you all so much for all of your questions. I'm just going to make a couple of comments. I would come back to the point about whether housing is an investment, whether self-built housing is an investment. You're right that that the kind of financial system and the way the housing market works is different in different parts of the world. But I actually do think that housing is an investment here, but it's slightly different. So just because you don't buy and sell a house, it doesn't mean that the house that you build is not a financial investment. The first thing is that if you have a house, you're no longer paying rent. And that's one of the major things that people want to do when they're building a house. But the other way in which the house is an investment is on land, which is increasing in value. And if it's your own house, you can rent it out. Or you could chop a piece, if you needed to, you could chop a piece of your land and sell it. So it is an asset, maybe not in the way we think of assets and investment in a formal housing market, but I think it is an investment, which is part of the reason why so many people want to buy land and they want to build houses. It's not just a question of shelter, but it's also where do you put your money in an economy like Ghana? Buying land and building houses, if you have the opportunity to, do more than one, that's an investment. And I think that that's kind of what we're encouraging this kind of conversation to see this so-called informal housing economy. It is actually part of the economy and the way in which people are behaving, their economic behavior, their choices about what to spend money on and what to invest in. So I think that we need to appreciate that. The other comment I wanted to make was on your question about sites and services you talked about in Botswana. I'm not so familiar with Ghana's experience with that, but I do know about it in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, where I've actually done most of my work. And this, again, comes back to this question about housing as an asset, because in Tanzania, the government in the 1980s, it did lay out plots that people could then build on. What happened? People in the Ministry of Land got those plots. Or if they were allocated to someone else, there was what's called downward raiding, so that middle-class elites people would come in and pay a very high price because they knew that that well laid out piece of land in a city where governments from colonial times had never ever built housing for the urban majority. It was so valuable. They knew that it would be valuable in the future. And so those sites and services places now are some of the most lucrative parts in the city, where the real estate and the land is the most expensive. And the landscape is something that people want to live in. You know, people aspire to live there. So, and it goes back to this point I'm trying to make about housing as an investment, as an asset, whether it's through self-building or whether governments, you know, lay out these, you know, tiny, tiny projects. They just become assets for the middle classes and the elites. Not so much the housing that we're talking about, the everyday self-built housing, but we need to kind of see this kind of bigger economic picture and how we're all implicated in it.
Thank you, Claire. I think let me say a big thanks for the variety of comments and suggestions and questions at this event. Very insightful. So I'll try, and then I've noted a few things here that I want for clarity. I think you wanted to find out whether there was any differences in the selection. Interestingly, this is what I think we didn't, weren't able to, we couldn't present this. But for example, in Accra here, the two communities that we find, we realized that for the low-income community, rental income was so critical. Yeah. You always find somebody, the landowner, with other tenants. And depending on the size of the plot, the number of tenants vary. So rental income was so critical, to the extent that and some of the interviews that we had, even for those families or individuals or households with small plots, they were trying to go vertical. And they were trying to go vertical so that at the end of the day, they were able to rent part of the story building, or sometimes they use the ground floor for commerce or other economic activities, or home-based economic activities. But not so much of that in the high-income areas. In fact, we found that also in Tachiman. In the high-income area, there were very few, rental, it was even difficult to identify tenants in that very community. But in the low-income area, there was no problem at all. So that was one of the big difference we found. Then there was a question about whether we did count. No, we didn't get the opportunity because this wasn't a survey, a pure survey. But the census report gives us a good, lot of good information on uncompleted houses. Because it became a prominent feature of our urban space and the housing sector, in 2010, the Ghana Statistical Service introduced questions on whether the house we are living in is completed. So if you check the results, you get a good picture. I think from 2010, there's good information on uncompleted houses, and that was also repeated. Interestingly, if you look at the census, the proportion in the overall housing stock in terms of uncompleted declined slightly in 2021, which is maybe we may have to interrogate. Yeah, because you still see a lot of uncompleted houses. And in all the communities that we visited, both high and low, there were a lot of uncompleted houses or ongoing construction. The questions that you raised are really, really, really interesting. The debates about the positive side of self-board vis-a-vis the externalities. Yeah, I think if you drill down and look critically, sun winning, because many times, like the example that Dr. Mankwa gave, sometimes within the urban space, we generate the waste here and we dump it somewhere. We go for the sun somewhere. I was once traveling from Asamankase towards Accra, and I stopped to buy what they call Gary. And I said, I thought it was supposed to be cheap here. The lady said, no, it's not cheap here. And the first thing he mentioned was that sun winning is destroying their land. And why is this so? Because there's a huge demand for sun in Accra for our construction. So the externalities are really rare, and we need to pay attention to. And then also the question about the youth. Yeah. We found out that yes, you find a few youth who have moved from transition from staying with father or parents to becoming tenants, and then now either building on their own or living in their own houses. But the numbers, even though we didn't do a survey, the numbers weren't great. And if you look at what has been said about housing, particularly the pricing of house, yes, that also today, if you are a young person and your income is not within a certain area, you cannot stay in Accra. You can't stay in Accra. Probably your best bet is probably in Accra here, maybe Winneba and beyond. And so, and it's the same in what they call Tachimai. One of the communities, an artisan told us point blank, here you cannot the high income. So here you cannot buy a land. You have to go somewhere, Tanoso or whatever, which is also very far. So the last one that I talked about is your point about my friend from People's Dialogue. I don't know whether you are still there. Yes, there's a big issue. We need a conversation about affordable rent, because I agree that not all of us can build. Even if you reduce the price of home ownership to even $1,000, somebody somewhere will fall through the cracks, wouldn't be able to acquire. But unfortunately, if you look at all the interventions we've done with affordable housing, it's all about home ownership. We've not done very well with building to rent to the poor. Is it possible we can begin to think about affordable housing by going vertical? Typical of the Hong Kong type, these skyscrapers with small cubicles. That's so that maybe when I'm single, because elsewhere, the types of housing basically structured along the, the life cycle. So when you are single, there are particular types of housing that you can, with the support, once you are working and with the support of the bank. Once you get married and you are two with kids, there's a particular type of housing that you have to move in. When your children are grown up, you have to move in a particular type of. And then when you get to pension, when the kids have left you, and it just may be yourself and then your wife or your spouse, you see them coming back to rent a particular type of houses conducive. That is where they sell off the big house they acquire whilst they were young with a big family, and then they move on and they have all this disposable income to spend, possibly contributing to their longevity and life expectancy. Unfortunately, if you go to East Legon and other places, and all the places that I know, you have big houses, you have mother and father, or probably one person and maybe a maid stay in that house. Maintenance even becomes a problem. And that means that investment or savings which were made over the years is locked up there. So we need a conversation around that. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for this wonderful discussion. We have come to the end of today's discussion, but I hope that the discussion will not end here. So the policies may not be enough, but what is in existence, we need to enforce them. We have agreed that we also, particularly in low-income areas, or even in the rich areas, we still need that technical know-how, and these are a bit lacking so that we can have proper housing. There is the need to have a bigger conversation and a broader conversation around housing and housing economy as a whole. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing with us. And we hope that this conversation will continue, particularly at the governance level, both at the district level and at the ministry level as well. The utility services, we hope this conversation would continue, and particularly we're thinking of how governance and utility can come together to put a lot of regulations, enforce a lot of regulations around our housing. Thank you very much. CSOs here, we hope that the advocacy would go on. Academics here, we hope that more research will be done in this area to bring out more findings around housing, self-built housing, urbanization, and economic growth. Thank you very much. So